Okay, I think we can start. Now let me distribute you the paper presentations. Okay, and if you can pick up a copy. We're going to start the presentations on the 7th. And I'm also handing in you the evaluation form that I am going to use and you are going to use for your peers during the presentation. Okay. Hakan, once Semih selects, you can have one of those as well, but I prefer that you had number 8 because it's a very basic paper. Nobody selected it. So if you want, you can go ahead with 8. Okay, or we will talk about it later. Okay. So any questions on this? Any conflicts? Yes.
Konflikt değil de 4. sınavım var. Akşamda da gözetmenliğim var.
Ama keşke söyleseydin daha önce. Didem, are you willing to change with her? Okay. 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 So we're going to start with paper number 4 on May the 5th, and May the 7th we're going to do paper number 9. Okay. Now, as I told you before, you can hand in me the presentation, the prepared presentation that you have, and we can talk about that. And try to make sure that you are going to be able to finish in 35-40 minutes, 35 minutes more or less. And I think it will be a good experience in order to figure out what part of a paper to read and what part of a paper to summarize. And so in that respect, I think it will be an experience which we are going to benefit from. Okay. Any questions on that? So, excuse me, we're going to start May 5th, which means that we're going to start next Tuesday. Okay. Okay. I said May 7th, so it was a mistake. Now, there is nothing scheduled for May 18th. May 18th is actually a Monday. It's a Monday, but it replaces a Thursday. So in that case, we'll see what we will do that day, and depending on the reaction of the other students who are supposedly in this classroom. Okay. Any questions? Now, today what I'm planning to do is as follows. I will, remember last time I talked about game theory very little in a very sort of introductory manner, but you got the idea where what you have in game theory is usually you have a reaction function in competitive game theory, and the way you solve that is you bring all the reaction functions of different parts together and try to obtain a solution. That solution is called an equilibrium, actually, because basically it's a solution which brings all the parties to a satisfactory level. Now, today I'm going to continue and talk about the paper by Eppen and Ayer. This is 1997. And again, we're going to see a very typical contracting environment. Then after this, what I will do is I will basically go over the contracting topics, type of contracts, and talk about different issues sort of in a concluding manner. So this is what I'm planning to do for today, and it may go over to Thursday's lecture as well. Okay. Now, the idea of the paper is, again, there are some catalog sales. We are now familiar with this idea. What do we mean by catalog sales? You first distribute the catalogs, people would look at the catalog and make orders accordingly. Okay? So the merchandise that you are selling is not going to be available, but you're going to see the picture, or you're going to see maybe a three-dimensional picture in a website. And basically, you're going to order the merchandise accordingly. Now, if this merchandise that you are ordering is a machine part, let's say you are doing, if it's a component, then it's going to be less of a problem because it means that it has some standards. But when we talk about a specific garment that you wear, okay, something that you wear like a jacket or something that you wear, then it becomes very important because it may fit, it may not fit, and so on and so forth. So the catalog sales usually come up with the idea of returns. In other words, if the customers are not happy, they can return the item. So this is more or less the specific property of this type of an environment. You might be familiar, there are some catalog sales firms around the world which are very well known, like LL Bean. Maybe you have heard about it. Okay, LL Bean is a company which operates at Maine, United States. Maine is sort of the point which is at the north. It is in the border with Canada, but it's actually in the northeast, so it is very close to the North Pole. It's sort of like a very cold place, icy place, and so on and so forth. So this is a place which is established at Maine, and what they do is they have been doing this catalog sales for over 50 years. So what they are doing is they are simply sending catalogs to their known customers and potential customers, and people are ordering accordingly. Of course, they allow for returns, but some people are sort of, they know LL Bean very well. So, for example, if I order a shirt of a certain size, I know that it's going to fit me. Or a shoe of a certain size, I know that it's going to fit me. So, basically, I start buying from LL Bean. Now, of course, again, as I said, returns are in very high percentages, because basically you don't like the color. There is usually no problem with the merchandise itself, but it might be the case that you are gaining some weight, so on and so forth, so it doesn't fit as good as it used to fit 5 years ago. Okay, so there are returns. Now, there are similar companies. One of them, another one is Land's End. I think it's written like this, Land's End. Again, they sell similar type of merchandise. These are in the US. And in Netherlands, they used to have similar companies operating in different sectors as well, like in the music sector, so on and so forth. So this is something which has been going on for some time. Of course, with the new understanding, it has an increasing. It has the sales of this type of sector is increasing with the introduction of e-trade, actually, because what you do in e-trade is exactly the same, but now you don't even have to have a catalog because you can just enter the website and order from there. So you can say that these are the ancestors of the e-trade business. Okay, now. What is the problem with the merchandise that they sell? This is very typical. We have very long lead times. In other words, we're talking about items that we wear, and usually the setup time is very long. Of course, you have very high uncertainty. In other words, you can imagine that this type of a sector is going to be affected by anything. Okay, if you have a warmer winter a specific year, then you won't be able to sell LL Bean's most of the merchandise because they are geared towards things that you wear during winter, actually, like very thick shirts, so on and so forth. Actually, they are known to sell the oduncu shirt. You know oduncu shirt? Like you have this like colorful thing. Okay. So the uncertainty is pretty high, and the returns are actually around 30 to 50%, which is pretty high. You can imagine actually what's going on there. You can see that although you think that you are selling, it may come back. Okay. And of course, you have limited opportunities to adjust buying decisions. So LL Bean once bought a group of shirts or manufactured a group of shirts. It's very difficult for them to go back and make another decision with respect to quantity that they are going to order and so on and so forth. So it is usually the case that you make a decision, and after some time you may make some adjustments, but very little, but it's very inflexible. These type of manufacturing activities are always very inflexible. So what our authors have proposed them is to have the so-called backup agreement. And backup agreements are actually kind of a flexibility contract. So in this manner, we are going to see some kind of a flexibility contract, and let us see what's happening. Now, first of all, the way that we see the environment is as follows. We have the so-called period 1 and period 2. Now, I have specifically drawn these as different because the length of those periods are going to be different. So, beginning of period 1 is the period where you make a certain commitment, and then at the end of period 1, after you observe the demand partially, what you do is you operate or you manage the second part of the flexibility contract. So this is the way that it goes, and usually period 2 is very inflexible, it is longer, and what I'm talking about in period 1 is I'm talking, let's say, 2 weeks to 20 or at most like a month, depending on the merchandise. So you make a certain commitment. You say that I am going to order this quantity, and then you have some flexibility, and you use the flexibility here, and you live with that through the end of the season. Okay. Now, in the news vendor problem, for example, what is the difference? This is not there. So you make a commitment and you live with that towards the end of the horizon. Okay, here on the other hand, you have some possibility of making an adjustment. So this backup agreement is using that adjustment. Let us see what kind of an adjustment we are talking about. Now, usually it turns out that what we are talking about is 10% of total sales is observed in period 1 and the remaining is in period 2. So what happens is simply the following. You print the catalog, actually, and then you start sending the catalog. Still you are, and in the meantime, you are going to give your first order. But when people receive the catalog, they are going to make some orders immediately, okay, in the beginning of the season. So you are going to make use of that information so that you make an adjustment here in the beginning of the second period. This is more or less the idea. Now, we're going to see what is the adjustment that we are talking about. So let me bring in some notation. Y is the original commitment. So you commit for Y units in the beginning of the first period. But the flexibility is as follows. Y times 1 minus rho units are going to be delivered for C per unit. So this is what we mean by flexibility. Let's say that you order 100 units. The flexibility is, let's say, 20%. So it means that 80 units are delivered here immediately with this cost. Now, what you can do is, for the remaining 20%, you may ask all the remaining 20%, depending on the demand that you observe. Or you may say that, well, I'm not going to take it. In that case, you pay some penalty. Okay? So it is not basically you can do whatever you want, but you pay some penalty for that. But instead of buying and not selling it, you immediately pay the penalty and not buy it. So this is the flexibility that we're talking about. Now, so Y times rho is held by the manufacturer. Now, let's say that selling price in the market is R per unit. And of course, we are going to have random demand. And for the quantity that we have left at the end of period 1, we are going to pay a holding cost per unit, which is H1. And for the items that we cannot sell, pi is going to be lost sales cost per unit for the items which are not delivered at the end of period 1. Now, of course, you can see that this is very unlikely. In other words, we're talking about 10% of the total sales. It's a shorter period. And it's very unlikely that the total demand here is going to be more than Y times rho. Excuse me, Y times 1 minus rho. Okay? It's very unlikely that your demand is going to be, because you are shooting for the whole season, you order 100 units, okay? 80 of them arrives immediately, and the chances of having a lost sales here is negligible, because you expect that you are going to have more units. But we write it here in this fashion. Now, again, what happens is simply the following. We are going to have a so-called random variable. Let's call that random variable psi. So psi 1 is going to be the random demand. And let's say that we have some kind of a distribution for this psi. Okay? Now, the idea is that, of course, you have some kind of a knowledge in the beginning of the period, and that is directed accordingly. Now, this is what happens in period 1. Okay, any questions on what's going on, the dynamics in period 1? Okay, now let us analyze what's going on in period 2. Now, in period 2, first of all, what is the decision? You are going to either live with the commitment, buy everything, or maybe not buy a part of it, depending on the demand that you observe. So, first of all, we observe the following. V% of the sales will be returned. Now, we have even worse scenario where you think that you are selling some items, a percentage of it is going to be returned in the beginning of the second period. And of course, now U% of this V% is a constant, and this is the quantity, the percentage of returned items that can be used in the second period. Now, the idea is as follows. You have returns coming in continuously. Okay? Of course, you cannot use all those returns. Number one, the merchandise might be damaged. Number two, the returns may come very late in the period, so it may not coincide with the demand which is available. So if that's the case, then you can only use a certain percentage. So they define a U%, which is a constant, and it basically tells us the percentage of the returned items that can be used for sales again. Okay? So you can see that that can be used for sales. I should have here for sales in the second period. Okay. So what happens is that now we have the following. Now at the end of the first period, we had 1 minus rho, y times 1 minus rho in the beginning of the period. And then we had a demand, so this is psi 1. This amount was sold. So this is the amount which is available at the beginning of the second period. And then at the top of that, we have some returns coming in. So we are going to have psi 1 times U times V. Okay? Now V% of this demand which is sold is returned, and you can only use U% of that. So this is actually what we write. Okay? And so basically this is going to be the quantity that you can use for sales in the beginning of the second period. Now, on the other hand, what is the other possibility? It might be the case that you sold everything and you have zero available. So you are not going to have any loss, any returns as well. Okay? Or excuse me, you can always have some returns. If this is the case, plus we have y1 minus rho, which is the quantity which is sold, U times V is going to give us the returns that we are going to expect from those sales. So this first part is going to be the on-hand part. The second part is going to be the additional quantity that you are going to have in the beginning or during the second period, which is going to be available for sales. It's like ordering something and it comes later. Now, at the top of this, you are going to exercise your option. Now, you may buy the remaining quantity, or you may not buy the remaining quantity. So option is buy up to y times rho units for C per unit. So you pay the same price and pay B per unit for units that you don't buy. So you have an option of using the exercise. Actually, the correct word is an option. if you are familiar with the financial markets, actually, option is a right that you have, and you can exercise it or not exercise it, depending on the information that you have. If you exercise it for the quantities that you exercise, you still pay the same unit cost as you had before. For those units that you don't exercise the right, you pay a penalty to the manufacturer. Okay, so you can see that actually what you have is here you have a decision in the beginning of period 2. You have a decision to give, and that decision is whether you want to exercise the option or simply give the penalty and leave. Of course, B should be less than C. You can see that. Otherwise, you would never exercise your option. And what is the benefit of this to the manufacturer? I mean, why is the manufacturer going into some kind of a backup agreement? Now, manufacturer is taking a risk because what manufacturer is doing is basically manufacturing Y units, keeping it in stock. But there is always a possibility that they won't be able to sell all those Y units. Now, the Y units that is ordered in the beginning with this system is going to be higher than the quantity which is ordered if you don't have this type of an agreement. Why? Because retailer, knowing that has a possibility of exercising or not exercising that option, is now open to new opportunities. They order more in the hope that they are going to get more if the sales are okay. So the quantity which is ordered initially, the Y, under this kind of a flexibility contract is always going to be more than the quantity which is ordered in a scenario where you don't have this contract. In other words, the retailer is going to be inclined or willing to order more because the retailer knows that she may or may not exercise the option. Okay? So given that information, there will be a tendency of ordering more. In other words, remember we are always computing cost of underage, cost of overage. Okay? The cost of underage under the flexibility contract, the cost of overage under the flexibility contract goes down. Oops, incorrect. The ratio, actually, the ratio of cost of underage divided by cost of underage plus cost of overage goes up because cost of overage actually goes down. Okay? Compared to CU, CO value is going to go down. Why? Because if at the end of the first period, if you have a lot of left in the inventory, you are not going to buy the remaining quantities. So it means that the chances of having a lot at the end, on hand, is going to go down. This is the only thing that you can control, actually. Okay? So given that, what this means is that the cost of overage is more than the system where you don't have this option. So in that case, as this goes down, relatively speaking, the fractal that you are going to order, this is the fractal, is going to go up. As a result, you're going to order more. Okay? This is the idea. Now, once you order more, this is going to be in the benefit of the manufacturer as well. Because the manufacturer will have the opportunity of selling more. And in that respect, in order to make the retailer order more, the manufacturer is always willing to give this flexibility. Okay? So this is sort of a typical contract that you will see. Any questions on the idea? Okay. Now, let us see what's happening in the second period. Now, of course, the second period demand is going to be Xi2. Again, this is the random second period demand. Of course, this demand is going to be a function of Xi1, what you have observed in the first period. Okay? Now you can write several different relationships between the demand that you observed in period 1 and the demand that you are going to observe in period 2. You can have simple relationships, more complicated relationships, but what this means is that with the information that you have with the 10% of total sales, you can make a prediction and correct the total demand that you are going to see in the season. Okay? So this, in that respect, this is another distribution. Of course, this U times V works for the quantity sold in period 2 as well. In other words, in period 2, you are going to make some sales. You are going to make some sales, and those sales are going to return to you in some intervals. So this is what you assume. So in that case, what will happen in period 2, we are going to have H2 as the holding cost for the items at the end of the period. Pi is again the penalty cost, and it's usually the same penalty cost because it is per unit that you cannot satisfy, you pay a penalty. Okay? Whereas H2 depends on the time frame. So H2 is different than H1 because H1, period 1 is shorter. Okay, so you pay more probably for H2. And of course you have the possibility of having some kind of a salvage value at the end of the period. Okay. Now, how are we going to solve this? Now, this is basically a 2-period newsboy problem. So this 2-period news vendor problem simply has 2 decisions. One of them is related to Y, what should be the quantity that you order. The second decision is, should I exercise my option or not, given a certain demand information for the first period. So how are we going to solve this problem? We usually approach this problem by solving the second period problem first. If you have a certain state, certain sales in the first period, that is going to mean a certain demand distribution for the second period. So for each row 1, you are going to have a distribution function row 2. Okay, let's say that you can write those, and basically what we're going to solve is, given this, we are going to find out whether we are going to exercise the option or not. So you have 2 choices actually. You write, well, actually you have an interval choice where you can exercise the option for some of the quantities and not exercise for the remaining ones. And so so what you have is you have a single decision variable in an interval. Okay? So you are going to decide the quantity that you are going to exercise the option. Okay? So you have a single decision variable. Now, once you solve that problem, actually, because that problem is not very difficult because you have a single decision variable. Next problem is to include period 1. Now, period 2, cost of period 2 is going to be a function of the remaining quantity. You can see that if the remaining quantity is more, you are going to pay the B per unit for almost everything. Okay? If the remaining quantity is less, you are going to use all the option. So you can see that the solution is actually a threshold type solution. So given that, then you write the two-period problem and solve both of them and optimize y. So this is called, actually, this is an example of stochastic programming with recourse. In other words, you can make a correction on your initial decision by using this option. Okay? Now, although this, you might not be familiar with stochastic programming with recourse. Recourse means that you can take a corrective action, okay, in the second period. Now, what we had in the exam, for example, is again an example of the stochastic programming with recourse. Because remember, in the exam second question, what did we have as the question? We had, I told you that we have two options with respect to what to do with the remaining quantity. Okay? Now, given the initial quantity which is available, you are either going to use option 1 or option 2, or you know the quantity of option 1 that you are going to use. So given that you solve that problem optimally, second period problem, if you can write it in a closed form, put it back to the objective function, then you can solve for the original y variables, okay? Original order quantity, okay? Similar thing is true here, although, of course, if you read the paper, you're going to see that this is not possible to represent in a closed form, okay? You can solve it numerically. What is the meaning of solving numerically? You solve the second period problem for, let's say, a large number of possibilities with respect to the ending inventory, okay, for a given y. And then once you have that, then you solve the first period problem using the optimal solution of the second period problem. It's dynamic programming, actually. Okay, this is also dynamic programming in a respect, but you have sort of, you might be lucky to have a nice form so that you can insert everything and solve it in a closed manner. Okay, I'm not going to solve this, but if you are interested, you can read the paper in terms of and find out how they are going to solve the problem. Do you have the paper with you? Actually, anyone? Okay. I didn't bring the paper, unfortunately. And so, any questions on this? Now, this flexibility contract is actually a one-sided flexibility contract. In other words, you can only exercise, okay, the option by either buying the quantity that you reserved or not buying part of it. Whereas there might be a flexibility contract where you might want to buy more than what you said in the beginning. In other words, if we have very good sales going on, what I can do is I can say that, is it possible for me to order a little bit more? I ordered 100 in the beginning, but is it possible to get a total of 120? So you can go up as well. And this is only possible, of course, if the manufacturer, not in this environment, but if the manufacturer is manufacturing the same product over and over again, your sales are much better. So what you do is you simply require to have a little bit more that period than usual. So this is only going to be possible if you have a standard product. So you have to have a multi-period environment in order to show the effect of that kind of a flexibility contract. In real life, let's say that we're talking about Arçelik and one of the suppliers of Arçelik, which operate with flexibility contract. What is the meaning of this? Well, every period, every month, the supplier is expected to supply 100 units. That's the speed of the assembly line that they have in Arçelik. Okay. But in some periods, they might be selling very good, and they might have very large orders coming in for from, let's say, England for export. So what they are going to do is they are going to increase that quantity. But the supplier has already adjusted itself to a rate of 100 per month. So what will happen then? Then they are going to pay a premium to the supplier for those periods where they order more. So the supplier is going to work overtime as well in order to bring in the additional quantities. But similarly, they might have an option of 20% like this, and if they exercise that option, it means that they're only going to buy 80 in some periods, but pay some penalty for the items that they don't buy, which is already manufactured. Okay? So now, given this, you have a flexibility contract that works both sides, and it is used in environments where you have a standard product and you make production over the multiple periods. Okay. Any questions on this? This is a very nice structure, and I believe that this paper is worthwhile because it exploits that nice structure. Now, next thing that I will do is, basically, I'll try to generalize all of these and give some names of different contracts. We have already seen a number of contracts, actually, but I will give an analysis which is going to look very simple compared to what we have been doing here. Okay. Okay, first of all, I have to describe a certain setting, and that will be the starting point. And the setting will be as follows. Now, I'm going to call this a two-stage sequential supply chain. Sequential supply chain means that one party gives some decisions, the other party goes on and gives more decisions. So what we have is, we have a buyer and a seller, or let's say a supplier. Buyer can be a manufacturing firm, buyer can be a retail store, and so on and so forth. Now, what are the buyer's activities? Now, buyer generates a forecast. Now, orders or determines how many units to order from the supplier. And places an order to maximize her own profit, let's say expected profit. Now, if possible, of course, purchase based on forecast of customer demand. In other words, if there is any flexibility here, they are going to generate a forecast, make the order, but eventually purchase using some realization of the customer demand. I mean, if there is an additional information. If there is no additional information, of course, you have to purchase everything you order. Now, what are the supplier's activities? Now, react to the order placed by the buyer, and most of the cases use a make-to-order policy. In other words, if in this catalog sales we are talking about a merchandise which is not sold regularly, so you are the manufacturer is going, or the supplier is going to manufacture this for once and sell it. So given that there is an order placed, the supplier's role is to react to that and use a make-to-order policy. Okay? Now, this is one side of the coin. We are going to see if the supplier operates using a make-to-stock policy. Not in this type of an environment, but in a more general environment where the items are manufactured and sold over and over again over the periods. Whereas here, usually we have a single order coming in and we use a make-to-order policy. There is no inventory because it is ordered by the buyer in a certain specific way. Now you can see from here is that the supplier's role is more passive. But supplier has a number of things that she can do. Set the price. Okay? Supplier can set the price. Supplier can set different rules. For example, different type of contracts, like flexibility, so on and so forth, which is going to affect the decisions of the buyer. So you can see that although it is passive, it has the role of having the power of making the decision. Okay? So it can affect that. So there are different ways of looking at this problem, but in general, this is what is going on. And given this base setting, actually, we're going to talk about different contracts over this simple scenario, which is actually a news vendor scenario. Okay? But we will see how we can create different contracting arguments using this scenario after the break. Questions? Okay. Then I'll see you after the break.